We're going to start off like this. We're going to first of all give you an outline of what is the mitzvah of Emunah. We're going to then go to how do you do Emunah. What are you supposed to believe in to constitute the fulfillment of the mitzvah of Emunah? And then we'll go to the final part, and that will be the challenge that we face in this society that we live in having Emunah. The obstacles. Let's call them just challenges. First of all, I want to give you not Gemara trivia, but some interesting piece of information. But I have to start with a question. Is there anyone, how many of you feel, and no humility or modesty, that you're, whether a man or woman, whether you are a tzaddik? Are there any tzaddikim here? I know it's modesty.
Different tzaddik. As opposed to a Russia.
Well, let's say just a tzaddik. You can I didn't ask to define it. This was Aaron's idea. Let's, and Tzidkoni is here.
Relative to study.
No, but I'm not asking what it is. I'm saying, is anybody ready to volunteer? I know there are many of you sitting in a very humble position, says the rabbi really doesn't know, but I am truly really a tzaddik. And I'm going to burst your bubble now. Because the Talmud tells us, in the tractate Bava Basra, it says, Gimel Averos Ein Odom Nitzel Mehen B'chol Yom. There are 3 sins that no matter how pious and how righteous, but somehow you have some connection to them. And they are. One of them is called Hirhure Avera, thinking thoughts that aren't really so kosher. And we're not going to elaborate on that. The second one is Iyun Tefillah, concentration in prayer. To be completely concentrated in the sense of focused. To be completely concentrated, I don't think is the right way to put it. But to be completely focused for every word that you say. Not the whole davening, just in the tefillah. Okay, just in Shemona Esrei, in the Amidah. Every word, every letter, complete concentration. As a matter of fact, there were stories of many tzaddikim that they would go over to a person in shul and give him shalom aleichem. Because they said, I haven't been far, I haven't left, I haven't gone away in 25 years. Yeah, but during Shemona Esrei, you're in the market and you're traveling here and you're traveling there and all your machshavas and your thoughts. And the third sin that it says that a person is not really ultimately trips up on a daily basis is something called avak lashon hara. Avak means a dusting of gossip. A dusting. The Gemara gives an example. This is in Bava Basra, very fascinating. Kuf Samach David Amud Beis. It says, when, for example, somebody will say, oh, that person, his house, the fires are burning all the time. Meaning to say that there's guests there all the time. So they're cooking and they're preparing. And but somebody can misinterpret it and say the fires are burning. It's a party house. They're partying all the time. So it's a slippery slope, very difficult to prevent this. But the Gemara also tells us another 3 sums. And it says, and most people are not familiar with this term, but you're familiar with the concept. It says, Sholosh Averos She'ein Oimdim Bifnei Pikuach Nefesh. There are 3 sins that even though Pikuach Nefesh means when your life is in danger, there's a basic rule in Judaism. There are 613 mitzvahs. But if doing a mitzvah endangers your life at any given time, a person has to go to the hospital, has to get in a car on Shabbat, a person has to take a certain medication that could be not kosher. Well, that's totally permissible because you're not eating it. You're taking it in the way of refuah. You're taking it in the way of medication. But there are countless stories, or even if a person comes to you and threatens you, if you're not going to violate the Shabbos, I'm going to kill you. The law is you're supposed to violate the one Shabbos to be able to keep many more of the Shabbos experiences. And every mitzvah, pikuach nefesh, not just grudgingly, but pikuach nefesh is the most important of mitzvahs. Per pikuach nefesh means preventing damage to the body, preserving the human life, takes precedent over any other mitzvah. It's precedent. That's the mitzvah. And no hesitation and no reluctance. Because if you'd have a hesitation and say, well, should I or shouldn't I? A person could lose a life from that hesitation. But there are three that the Gemara says, and this is not even a Gemara. The Gemara brings it down, Toysus brings it down in Saita. It says three of them, however, no reluctance or no way can you do whatever you have to do to save the life. And it says, what are the three? And this is famous because you're familiar with the term, Yaharog v'al Ya'avor. You have to be ready to be killed and die, rather, and I mentioned it last week in a lecture that I gave. Some of you were at that moment. Yaharog v'al Ya'avor means that you have to give up your life for these three. Every mitzvah, it's Ya'avor v'al Yaharog. Do the sin, and do not give your life for that. Don't get killed for it. But these three, and what are the three? And you know, Avodah Zarah, worshipping idols, Gila Arayas, to violate a woman or a man in a sexual manner, and Shvichas Damim, murder. And I pose a question to you tonight, just to start. I understand the enormous harm that takes place if somebody says, I'm going to kill you if you don't kill someone. And therefore the law is you have to be ready to give up your life. If you don't, it's a sin, they don't punish you, they don't kill you for that, but nevertheless you have to. The din is Yarog Bal Yavar. I understand it. It's something that's irretrievable, irrevocable. If you kill somebody, you cannot say, I'm sorry, and you know, I was forced to do it. It doesn't bring the person back to life. I can understand by Gila Aroyas, which is the Hebrew term for immorality, but it doesn't mean just immorality. It means if somebody says, I'm going to kill you, if you do not violate and attack, whether it's a woman, whether it's a man, whether it's to molest a child, and people, unfortunately, in the world, this is very prevalent. If you take a look at different countries in Africa, or you take a look in war, they have the warring factions. They go after the women. If you look at Bosnia and what happened over there, we're not getting into the political situation. This is the way of the world. So if somebody tells you to do something like that, you have to be willing to give up your life. But the third one is Avodah Zarah. If somebody tells you, you have to convert. Or you have to bow to an idol. And I ask the following question. The question is, I understand Shvichas Damim, killing, and I understand acting to violate another human being, a woman, a child, or a man in this crazy time that we live in. Different times that we live in. But what do you mean? A person is going to be forced, someone's going to put a gun to your head and say, bow down to this idol, or go into this church, or go into, say, forcibly, I want you to convert, and you say, I'll go in, what's the big deal? I don't believe this. I'm doing it just to save my life. How is that put on par? Why is that put on par? Why is that put in equal? The other two, you can't turn back the clock once the damage is done. This says, I never had in mind, I was thinking about gefilte fish the whole time. I wasn't, right? And we find something very interesting by Jews. You find it by non-Jews too, but by Jewish people you find that there were Jewish people who were not observant and were not committed. And it came an epic time in their life, a seminal moment when they were put, their life was on the line. You either have to convert or to a different religion or we'll take your life. And they were willing to give up their lives. Not every time, but there were tens of thousands of times. Matter of fact, Elie Wiesel, in his book, The Night, he writes a story of a friend of his father who his whole life was known as an atheist. And a German soldier, a Nazi soldier, came over to him and threatened him and says, say, you'll spit on the Jewish religion, you'll spit on the Jewish God. And he wouldn't do it. And he took out a pistol, put it to his head, and he said, do it or I'll kill you now. He says, no. And Elie Wiesel writes, he was a young teenager, he shot him dead on the spot. And he said he couldn't understand. Elie Wiesel came from a very Hasidic area of Hungary or Transylvania, and he became, of course, a Nobel laureate and for his writing. But he said he didn't understand. This man was a non-believer his whole life. What happened? So we're going to somehow engage this subject tonight, the subject of Emunah, the subject of faith. I had a story when we were living in Crown Heights, after we got married. There was a boy who came from this place called Grand Rapids, Michigan. And he lived in a suburb that he was the only Jew. And he wasn't really 100% Jewish. His father wasn't Jewish, but his mother was Jewish. So he was 100%. There's no, you're Jewish or you're not Jewish. But, and Judaism is the only religion that says you don't have to be Jewish and feels that Gentiles have a place in the world to come, similar to Jews. Different, but they also have a place in the service and worship and the salvation. But he said, once he found out that he is considered Jewish, he found out by chance on a computer. On a computer he found out. My computer crashed today. I'm very grumpy. So what happened? He decided, he bought a patch. He went to a store, like an Old Navy type of store, in a patch, and it said the word kosher in Hebrew. And he obviously couldn't read any Hebrew. He was brought up as a non-Jew. And he patched it, he had it on he ironed it on his coat. And he walked around with it. And he was going to university, and people came over to him and they said, "Hey, you're also Jewish. I'm Jewish too." And somehow his circle of finding out about Jews and Judaism, anyways, P.S., he ended up in my house at Crown Heights for Shabbos, but he ended up in a lovely family in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So where does this fit into the puzzle of the Jewish psyche? And I want to share with you some sources, and I'm not going to be too long, and just to try to get into some points that I think some of you may be familiar with, but I suspect most of you are not familiar with. And here is point number one. Maimonides is one of the few codifiers. Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, who's called Rambam in Hebrew, is one of the few codifiers, there was not a dozen of them, who codified the 613 mitzvahs. And he did it in two of his works, two of his seminal works. His first work that he has, the mitzvahs. That means he has mitzvah number 1 is this and this, mitzvah number 2 is this and this, mitzvah number 3 is this and this. So in his work called Mishneh Torah, which is his work of Jewish law, and before he begins the mitzvah, the work of Jewish law, he has the 613 mitzvahs, and he says, the first mitzvah of the Torah is, and I'm going to read you the word, Leida sheyesh shom Elokav, to know that there is a God. Shenemar, because it says in the Decalogue, in the Aseres Hadibros, in that is called the Ten Commandments, Anoichi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God. That is the first mitzvah. Now, he didn't say you should believe that Hashem is your God. He said, Leida, you should know